We're live.
Oh, we're live. Good. Dear, oh dear. The eyesight of a co-host. Welcome, everybody, to the next day of the Winning AO. And welcome, of course, to our co-host, anchor, Andrew Hill in Sydney. And today is a special treat because we're getting inside the mind of a champion as distinct from the mind of the runner-up that is nearly as good as the champion. Nearly 50-50, but always kind of fall short. So, Andrew, Leyton Hewitt, you've been close to in the past. What goes inside the mind of a champion?
All right. Well, head coach, I was the head coach out at Sydney International Tennis, and we ran the Leyton Hewitt tennis camp, and we had 200 students copying what Leyton was doing as he came #1 in the world at the Masters. And we were trying to mimic like the in-between court routine, this psych up. Not everyone will do the same thing, but just sort of going through the idea as a coaching camp whilst he was training. And then at night, 200 students went over and sat in the auditorium and watched him win, become #1 in the world right there in the tennis camp. So you'll never get that again. So that was amazing.
Memory, a lifetime.
Yeah,
How special is that?
That was amazing.
So let's talk around, because I know you know Darren Cahill and what he's done and other lessons from Agassi and others. So in my mind, the difference is just in the millisecond when it's pressure packed, tension filled, it's equal. And there's this phrase about, do you rise to the occasion or fall to the level of your training? And I would argue that you can't rise to the occasion because that's emotionally driven. You need to fall to the level of your training. And if you haven't done any training, then you are likely to be the loser rather than the champion. Any ideas of the training?
Yes, there's a very simple thing that our viewers could do, and majority cross court, because it opens up. It's the lowest part of the net, longest part of the court, makes the other person work harder. When you go down the line, they don't have to reach as much. So you want to make sure about your down the line shots. If you're slicing on the cross court is good because of that depth. But at the same time, you choose your best attributes when you go out there and play, and you build your game around, if I have a big serve or if I have a forehand weapon, you want to try and use that as your signature move.
Okay, so the first thing is having a tactic that is now in your subconscious that you've trained over and over again and that you can bring out without thinking about it. That would be the first thing.
It's nearly like a reflex response, and you've trained that one. You don't just hit balls, you actually train under pressure. So even the warm-ups, you train under pressure so that when you get out on the court, there's all these people. If you're not focused on what's happening on the court and you're looking at the people, your focus is definitely not on the game. So you're trying to block all that out. Yep.
So again, you just said then about focus. So being in the present moment is probably the skill between the Djokovic's and everybody else. So if you are, whatever percentage in the future about I must win this or I must not lose this or what will people say, you're now distracted. If a significant percentage is in the past, worrying about other times you've been in the situation and failed, and you've only got whatever percentage in the present, but you're playing Djokovic, who is always totally in the present moment. All he's concerned about is the back of the ball, hitting the back of the ball, keeping his head down in the present moment. The chances are somebody in the present moment, 100%, is going to beat somebody that's got 50% in the present moment.
Yeah, you could have the best forehand, but you're not focused. But they call that concentration or your flow. And probably the key part there is if you're thinking in the past or you're thinking in the future, you're not concentrating. So you'll see them look at their strings. They'll have their movements where they're getting comfy. They're just getting in the moment. They're getting ready to perform the next point, and they're doing it point by point.
Yeah, point by point is the key. Again, another key point, because whilst we talk about big and decisive points, which is true, there's only one point allocated to that point, just like every other point. So if you can get yourself in the mentality of it's just another point and go through your processes, then again, you'll start the point with the subconscious tactic. You will be in flow and prepared to be bold, I would suggest. Just getting the ball back and playing not to lose is not the mark of a champion.
It's a starting strategy. If you're doing a starting strategy and it's working, you stick with it. If it's not working, then you adapt. And that's when what you're saying is to respond and come up with other options. Yep.
And what do you think? A tricky question for you. What about identity? Because apart from the player, it's the person. You need to be a clutch person and a clutch player. Knowing yourself as a winner in these situations and looking forward to and celebrating them like Djokovic would do, because I know that when it gets to 4 or 5 all, he's thinking, oh, goody, goody. We're getting into tie breaks soon. And I win tie breaks. And he won 17 out of 18 before COVID, and that's no coincidence. So
no.
Talk to me, if you can or will, about training the identity of a clutch person as opposed to the identity of somebody that's going to do their best.
All right. A lot of the professional players might not play games. They might play points. So first to 10, first to 7, because this is something when you're evenly matched, that's when you need to start preparing for that. But they get in the mindset of just point by point. And when you think of a game is made up of points. But how many times do you see someone 40 love and then someone else comes back? So sometimes they lose their concentration. They think, I've nearly got this game, which means they're thinking in the future. But you need to go, next point wins. Yeah.
Yeah. And you could make an argument, in fact, we do, that even playing first to 1 is you're still playing slightly in the future. And the most important thing is to be in the present moment and just see the ball, the back of the ball, and hit the back of the ball. That gets you in the present moment. I would argue it's a little bit like being in one of your huge Australian rip curl waves, and you are riding the wave in the vortex, in the wave, relying on instinct and being in the present moment, because as soon as you start thinking, analyzing, being in conscious mechanical world, you'll be off and the wave will have you.
Yeah. You could be thinking sharks. You could be thinking that wave's big. They're all the negatives. And what you're trying to do is you're going, I am good and I can ride this wave all the way in.
Yeah. So, and
mindset.
Mind what? Theft, did you say?
No, mindset. You set your mind, to perform.
I think mind theft is also a very good phrase that I've never ever heard. Because it is. Because as Djokovic has said, you go out, you've got to come back in quickly. You're never just always in. So mind theft, I think I might take that, Andrew, and use it in
You've got a new term that will take the world by storm.
Mind theft. It's like identity theft. So we've got a very special guest today. Will you introduce David?
Yes, David Drysdale, manager. I met David when he was in Tennis Australia and in tennis programs all through Australia. And then he became the manager of Leyton Hewitt, and we did the Leyton Hewitt Academy. Now Leyton is working with Alex, but in that pre-time, I met David at Wimbledon, and he was taking young Alex to Wimbledon and doing all the team sort of concept to get them into the right mindset. So, it was amazing.
Great.
So he will be talking.
David, and he's talking today about what?
He'll be talking on the mindset of Leyton and the mindset of Alex, Both great attitudes, both high performers, how they train, with a lovely story about how Alex and Leyton used to be asked to train by the top players because their mindset and their performance in a warm-up is like a tennis match. They're practicing that,
Fabulous.
which is really what happens. Yeah.
Great. Well, probably without further ado, let us introduce you to David Drysdale, and we will see everybody again tomorrow with another great little talk and also a fabulous interview.
Thanks again from Sydney. Enjoy the winning AO.
Hello, viewers. Here we are today, the Winning Summit again, the AO series. And our special guest today is David Drysdale. And he's been a life in tennis as a coach, centre operator, state and national administrator. And one of the most important ones, which is where we sort of met again, was a manager to some of our top Australian players, in particular Leyton, Hewitt and Alex de Minaur, and what great news, just made the top 10. So over to you, David. Tell us about winning and what it takes.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. Look, it's an interesting aspect, the being able to win at the top level and how to become a top 10 player, which Alex now is, and which obviously Leyton was number one in the world. And it's been interesting through my journey at tennis to observe the very best in their environment. And what it seems to be that I've ascertained as to what makes the difference for them to become some of the best players ever in the world. There are thousands of players out there trying to make a living out of tennis. As we know, with the ranking systems, there's people ranked well over 1,000 in men's and in women's. So there's very few that actually make it to the top 10 world or even higher than that. And if you look at the standards of a player that's 200, 300, 400 in the world, they hit a fantastic tennis ball. They really do. They look good. They move pretty well. And as a club player or a pennant player or a social player, we look at them, we think, gee, that's amazing. And then we watch, if we're lucky enough, we get to watch tennis live, or we watch it on the TV. And when we do watch on the TV, it does slow it down and makes it look a little bit easier than what it really is. But when we watch it live, we see how great these players at the very top really are. So I guess the question begs, why do so few players make it to the top? And what is it that makes that player one of the best in the world? And there's no doubt it's the mindset of winning. It's what they do as a person, as an individual, that creates that environment, creates that desire, that creates that success. And, you know, there's important things as part of their mindset that they learn from a young age, and that's how to listen, it's how to learn, it's how to work, it's how to become dedicated to what they do, and in a lot of ways become obsessed with making it to the top. Now, when I say it's important to listen and learn, that's very important, especially at a young age. And what the best players are capable of doing is taking in what a coach will tell them, what a mentor will tell them, what a parent might tell them, and adapting that to how they play themselves, and then adding their own way of getting that into their mind.
Like their own signature moves, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the coaches will teach the technique that they think is best. But as we know, every player is different. Everyone is physically differently made up. So therefore, you adapt to what works for you. And a smart player works out what works for them and then work on that. And they don't just do the work that their coach tells them to do or their trainer tells them they do the extra work. It's the extra work that makes the difference. It's what they do with their fitness. It's what they do with their serve. It's what they do with their practice. It's the way they approach it. That's what makes the difference. And that's the mindset of a champion. And I guess I've been fortunate enough to be involved in the junior system within Australia and seen a lot of players come through that system. When I talk about Leyton, I was actually the manager of an Australian team when he was 13. We had 6 weeks in Europe, and that's when I really first got to know Leyton and how he played. And you could tell that he had that difference that could make him.
Yeah.
And it even came down to the way he would prepare. You walk into the kids' room, hotel room the next day, and his bag was already packed. Everything was placed exactly where it should be, nice and neat and tidy. Everything was there. He had his drinks ready to go. He had changes of clothes, towels, the whole works. He was professional at 13 years of age.
Yeah.
So he knew he had that mindset of being the best he could possibly be, so that when he got to the courts, he concentrated on what he had to do leading into a match and then what he had to do when he played a match. He wasn't distracted by other things. And watching him develop then as a player, and then eventually, I knew him quite a bit when I was at Tennis Australia and we ran the Davis Cups. So I got to see him regularly through that period, and then I was lucky enough to travel with him as his manager. So, and it was always interesting just to watch other players in the environments and the way they prepared themselves, the way they thought, the way they acted, the way they were with their teams, how they ate, what they ate, when they ate, how they would approach their practice, how they approach their training, how they would converse with other people, how they could have a joke, they could have a laugh. And of course, everyone's got different personalities, but it was really interesting to watch and learn, watching the very best compared to watching others that had fantastic talent, but still couldn't make it to that top 10. And if I use an example of a scenario, if you look at the week prior to a Grand Slam, which we're currently in at the moment.
Where we are now, yeah.
You look at the way a lot of the top players don't play in a tournament, an official tournament. Some will play an exhibition match and things like that so they can get tuned up. But a lot of them will look at how they practice for up to 3 days prior to the tournament commencing. And that's when you see the difference in the champions compared to the other good players. They will always choose someone in that first couple of days of the week that they highly respect, that they know is going to give everything on the practice court, where it's a really competitive scenario where they're going to get the very best and test themselves. And if I use an example, at the week before Wimbledon, you have the practice courts at Rangi, which a lot of people, anybody can get access to if they're in the tournament. And then the seeds will get access to one of the outside courts, one of the outside match courts. So if I use an example once, Leyton was hitting with Rafa Nadal leading into Wimbledon, and they both had extreme respect for each other, and they're very similar in the way they approach their practice, the way they approach everything, their fitness, everything to do with the game. And I was sitting courtside there watching Leyton and Rafa play, and they had their normal warm-up because there's only a special allocated time usually an hour that you've given on those outside courts in the week prior, and they then play a set where you would have thought it was the deciding set Grand Slam final.
Love it.
Intensity was absolutely amazing, and that was on court. When they changed ends, they'd have a joke, they'd have a laugh, but as soon as they stepped up to go back and continue the set, it was on for young and old. And but it was just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. About 2 courts away, I saw 2 players around 20, 30 in the world. I won't name who they were. Both very talented young men. And I was watching them from where I was with Leyton and Rafa. And they were joking around, they were kidding, they were mucking around, hitting balls and laughing and playing games. And I just looked at it and I thought, okay, look at the difference. Here's 2 guys that have been number 1 in the world, Grand Slam winners, going hell for leather. And here's 2 other guys that had the potential to be that, and yet they were mucking around. And this is the week prior to a Grand Slam. And sure enough, Leyton and Rafa went into the second week, but both of those 2 other gentlemen were out in the first week. And it was disappointing because one of them was a very good grassroots player. So it's interesting seeing the difference in attitude, and that's the mindset that we talk about. That's the mindset of applying yourself to what it is that you need to do to get to be the very, very best. You know, you take a kid like Leyton, he technically he was good technically, but he wasn't outstanding. He wasn't as fluid as a Roger Federer on court. He didn't have the power of a Rafa Nadal on court.
That court speed, is the magic.
But he was determined. He was there was no way he was going to let someone beat him, and it was his mindset, along with his fitness. It was his mindset that was the difference, and mindset is part of fitness. All those guys do that much fitness work. We do not have any comprehension of how much work these guys do with fitness. And a fitness work takes 3 or 4 years to build up a really good base. And that's working really hard in that first year. So it takes 3 or 4 years to work up that real fitness base. And if you've got that strong fitness base and you're really, really fit, that helps your mental application as well on difficult situations, on pressure situations. And, you'd be surprised at how much work Roger and Rafa, and you only got to look at Novak, how much fitness work those guys have done to get that. And that's the reason they've been at the very top. And if you look at the young females, you take Ash Barty, for example, when, I know through Craig Tyser, when Ash really worked on her fitness and got herself fit, that's the difference she made. She was always a fantastic player, but the fitness then helps the mental application as well. And the mental application is that of a champion. And you always see it that first week, or that week prior to a Grand Slam, when the way people practice. And that's why when Leyton was at the slams, he always practiced with Rafa, he practiced with Roger, he practiced with Andy Murray. It was the top guys that all had that same approach to wanting to get out there in a practice session and do the very, very best. I can remember when Leyton started working with a lot of the young Aussie guys. We were at Wimbledon one year, and he was bitterly disappointed because one of the young Aussie guys that he was going to warm up and give a hit to at a rangy as a practice session turns up 5 minutes before the court was available. So whereas we were there 40 minutes before, and hitting at the same time was also Dominic Thiem, Alexander Zverev. They were hitting at the same time, not together but separately, and they were there before we were. They were there doing their warm-ups, their stretches, doing fitness exercises, all those sort of things. So as soon as they stepped on court, when the court session started, they were ready to play.
Ready to play, and and
Really
flexible and
Aussie
warmed
guy,
up. Yeah.
Yeah, turns up, mucks around a little bit, wants to hit up, all that sort of stuff, and then you don't get the same intensity. And then it shows when they come to play matches. And that makes a massive difference with regards to attitude. So it's the attitude away from the court that nobody ever sees. It's the work that they do when they're on their own, when they're meant to be having time off. You'd be surprised how much these guys work, the extra work that they do. And I have no doubt Novak's been working his butt off through the end of December and early January. There's no doubt about it. One of the reasons Alex has been playing so well this year is because I think that fitness space that he started 4 or 5 years ago is starting to come together, and he's pushing himself a lot more now. And so therefore that's starting to help his game as well as he moves forward. So with regards to your club player, your average player, how can their mindset help their game? Well, it's pretty similar to the whole thing. You've got to look at how you do things, why you do things. You concentrate on your own game. Don't spend so much time on somebody else's game, or think you have a game plan when you walk out on court, sure, but then you've got to have the adaptability to be able to change if it's not working. And again, the best players can think for themselves when they're on court. 9 times out of 10, the coach that they have sitting with them, they're not the person that's instructing them to do things differently. They're the person that's there to give support. Yes. And it's up to the player to think their way through as to how it's going to happen. So it is a individual sport. You do have to have singular focus with regards to yourself. You do have to have a bit of an ego. There's no doubt about that. You can still have an ego but be a good person. So, you think of Roger and Rafa and these guys, they've got huge egos, those guys, but they're wonderful, wonderful people. So, and Alex is very similar. Leyton's a good guy. So you've got to think those things through. You can't have an ego and then be abusive towards people. You've got to be who you are as a person, and that comes across with the way you do things. So you also need to learn to be patient. So things take time, and depending on the individual, things will happen at different stages. We talk about Leyton and how good he was at 17, 18. He was number 1 in the world at 20 years of age. I remember Roger Federer playing the Australian Open Juniors that I was the tournament director of when he was 17 or 18. Outstanding looking player on the court, but mentally wasn't there. He wasn't ready to go. So he took a few more years to mature. And then when he did mature and he got that mental aspect of it right, look what happened. Yeah. So it's different for everybody. Rafa was an outstanding junior, had that mental application coming through from a young age. We heard all about him when he was 14 or 15 years of age. And then he hit the tour with a bang. So it's different for everybody. If we talk about Alex at the moment, and him now making the top 10 in the world, which is a fantastic achievement.
That's been a long-term goal for him, and it was so nice just to see him take on some top 10s, play his game, and now he's in the top 10.
Absolutely, and it's probably taken longer than what he wanted. One thing with Alex, he's always a pretty impatient young lad. He always did the hard work. There was no questioning of that. And he wanted that success. He was desperate for that success, so he'd work harder and harder. Sometimes he would get a little bit down on himself, but you talk to him, you make him understand that things will happen if you continue to do the hard work, you continue to think the right way. things will come. And he's had a bit of criticism lately that his game was too one-dimensional. We know he's the quickest guy going around a tennis court. Incredible movement. He hits the ball very flat, unusual to a lot of other players. So therefore, he was prone to make a few more errors. His serve sometimes would let him down. So it's been great to see him serving better. It's been great to see him change up his game a little bit more by using, his slice, especially his backhand cross-court slices.
And getting into the net as well. That's a great all-court.
He was pretty shy of the net when we first came across him, but he's becoming more and more comfortable with that aspect of it, which is fantastic. And that's good because he needs to have variation in his game to continue to mix it with the big boys and to have those wins. And I think it's fantastic where he's at the moment. And I hope he has a wonderful Australian Open and that this continues certainly for the first 6 months of the year, that he keeps building on this. And then hopefully by Wimbledon, he's up around the 5-6 in the world, and then anything can happen because, as he becomes better and he gets more confidence in himself, then things will come together even more for him. And so, one only hopes that continues. So, you look at a young kid like Yannick Sinner, who's bit of a gun at the moment. He certainly ended last year very well. He's got Darren Cahill working with him now, which will be a big help for him because it'll be about him Darren will give him the perspective of what he needs to do and quietly take him through how he needs to think and things like that and really work on that mindset with him the same way he did with Leyton when he was young, same way he did with Agassi. I think he also did some work with Roger for a while. And, we're seeing what
he's an amazing coach. I agree. He's one of the best out there.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And the reason for that, Andrew, is that he's just a clear thinker.
Yes.
He doesn't overcomplicate things, keeps things simple, very much the old Australian way of doing things. And I like the way that he approaches things. So the difference between making it to the top and staying around that 30, 40 mark is definitely the mindset. And the mindset comes from a very young age. And it's about developing it. And it's when that mindset kicks in. So even though it comes from a young age and so on, it might kick in when you're 17, it might kick in when you're 20, it might kick in when you're 23, 24. So, there's time, and we've noticed in tennis that they're playing it longer in their age groups these days. So I think there's more time for people in today's tennis for that mindset to develop. But if the player doesn't want to develop it, if the player doesn't want to develop themselves and have that mindset to improve themselves at all times, then they'll never get to that level, and if they do, it will only be for a very brief time. You look back at Roger, Novak, Rafa. They always worked on their games. It didn't matter if they were number one in the world. They continued to work on their games. Leyton continued to work on his game. Alex continues to work on his game. So there's never the perfect player. You've got to continue to work. You work at your fitness. You work at aspects of your game. You work on your strengths to make them even stronger, and you try to address your weaknesses. And it's part of that mindset of improving that. And that to me is the difference of becoming a champion.
I remember watching him at the Leyton Hewitt Academy and Tony Roach. Leyton's got his lovely two-hander, and Tony was working with him on a single-hander to just get that wide ball back across court. And he was number one, and he's still designing new shots. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's what they do. They try to improve the whole time. And we talked about Darren Cahill being a great coach. Well, there's certainly no one better than Tony Roach either.
Yes.
I used to love Roachy at Davis Cup ties. We always had an orange boy. And Roachy had a little test. He would get them on there at the end of the day. The orange boy usually has been hitting most of the day. He'd be pretty tired. Roachy would say, okay, we're just going to do a couple of baskets of balls. And he'd work them out pretty hard. And once he got to about the fourth basket of balls, if the kid had complained and said, well, hang on, I'm on my fourth basketball, I'm ready to stop, to Roachy, that was a sign, hey, this kid's not going to really make it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had a kid that was no matter what, and Roachy think this kid's got a chance.
That's good.
So you know, they're the little things, because again, it's that mindset scenario. You know, and Andy Murray, if you hear stories about him, very much the same. And that's, you know, unfortunately his body's probably letting him down more than anything else now. But he's done an incredible job to come back from having hip replacement and things like that. But that's, again, that's a lot of that's through mindset.
Look, we talk mindset. There's this other very big factor, and it was great watching you in this role. The team that supports the player, you know, and you as manager, you're getting all those things that you don't have to worry about, so that your player can just focus on what they have to do. So I think that was always a brilliant thing that you brought to the team.
Oh, look, I was part of a team. I had a role to play, and it's very important that you work with a player to get the right team around them. And you know, sometimes it'll work for a couple of months. Other times, you know, they might fall out of favour with a certain person. But you know, if you've got the right coach, the right trainer, the right physio, you know, the right manager, and they're hanging around and they're in a close-knit group, and the players relax, the players comfortable, and that's perfect. You know, a lot of it's about support.
Yeah.
It can be about guidance. Can be, you know, it's a bit of a tennis bubble. We hear that term a lot. It's very true. There's certain aspects of real life that a lot of tennis players have never had to experience, and so sometimes giving them a little bit of perspective doesn't hurt. And that's, you know, the important part of being part of a team is to be yourself, and not treat anyone with kid gloves. You've got to care for them as though they're your own, and you look after them. And so it's important to have the right team. And we see a lot of cases where, you know, people keep replacing people within their team, and that's unfortunate. In a lot of cases, they'll go back to people they've known for a long time in their life.
Reliable. Look, thank you very much. I've just heard a lot of tennis wisdom from your experience. So thank you, David. And I hope our viewers enjoyed all that as well. So until we meet again.
My pleasure, Andrew. Anytime. Good luck with it all.
Thank you very much.